Today's target will deal with parallel and perpendicular lines. By the end of today's lesson, you will be able to identify if two lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. And you'll be able to write the equation of a line that is parallel or perpendicular to a given line. So let's start with target number one. How do we identify whether two lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither? And the key here is going to deal with the slope of those lines. So whenever you're asked to find if two lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither, you must look at the slopes. So our rule for parallel is that two parallel lines have to have the same slope, identical. So here's the first example. Y equals 1/2 x plus 2, and y equals 1/2 x plus 5. Notice that your slope in both cases is 1/2. Identical slopes means parallel lines. Example number 2. Both slopes could be negative, as long as they are the same, -3 and -3. Once again, same slope, parallel lines. So it's fairly easy in this case. You may have to convert lines. So you may have a problem where you have two equations in standard form, and you'd have to convert them to slope-intercept like we saw in the previous video. But it's all about finding the slopes. And once you find the slope of both lines, if they're both the same, the lines will be parallel. Bit of a unique example here. You have x equals 2 and x equals 7. Keep in mind that the slope, both of these lines are vertical lines, therefore the slope is undefined. Same slope in both cases, both have undefined slopes, therefore they are parallel. Next we have perpendicular. A little bit more complicated. Slopes of two perpendicular lines are opposites, different signs, and they are reciprocals of one another. So one's going to be positive, one's going to be negative, and they should be flipped upside down. So our first example here, we have y equals 3/2 x plus 3 and y equals -2/3 x plus 3. One's positive, one's negative. They're flipped upside down, so they are opposites, therefore they are perpendicular. Okay, they must be complete opposites. So 3/2 and 2/3 are not complete opposites because they're both positive. In order for them to be perpendicular, one has to be negative, one has to be positive. Here's a second example. If our first line is y equals -2 x minus 3, what's the opposite of -2? Think about what we did with the do-undo chart. The opposite of -2 would be positive 1/2. Keep in mind, they have to be different signs, so the positive part should have been easy. And then think about -2 is really -2/1. So if you were to flip that, the opposite would be positive 1/2. And then finally, we have a unique situation here. Y equals 5 and x equals 2. We've got a horizontal line with a slope of 0 and a vertical line with a slope that's undefined. This one you've got to remember that a slope of 0 and a slope of undefined are perpendicular. And if it doesn't follow one of these two rules, they're not both identical or they're not complete opposites, then it would be neither parallel or perpendicular. So we go back to the previous example I talked about. If you had two lines, one was y equals 3/2x minus 5, and the other one was y equals 2/3 x plus 1. They are reciprocals, but because they're both positive, it's neither parallel nor perpendicular. They're not the same, so they can't be parallel, and they are not opposite signs. So it can't be perpendicular. So that's the first part of today's topic. The second part is actually writing equations that are parallel or perpendicular to a given line. So if you were asked to write the equation line that's parallel to the given line and it goes through the point. So keep in mind what we did a couple of videos ago where we used point slope form. We want to do that again because we're given a point. Okay, so just like we labeled before, we're going to label this one again. We've got x1, y1, but we need m. So to find m, you refer back to the parallel or perpendicular equation. So we look back up here, we say, okay, we want to be parallel to that line. Two parallel lines have the same slope, therefore our m should be exactly the same. So we're going to use a slope of 2/5. So now we have m, we've got our point x1, y1. So it's simply a matter of plugging it into the equation. So we've got y minus -1 equals 2/5 x minus 10. I'll go ahead and change that double negative into a positive. And here's my final answer. So the tricky part here is that we have to use our parallel equation to find the slope. Keeping in mind that if we want to be parallel, in this case, we need to have the same slope. In our next example, we're going to write an equation line that's perpendicular. So same idea, we have a point, we have 1, 1, so that's x1, y1. We want to put it in the form y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. So once again, for the slope, we're going to use the perpendicular equation this time. So going to our equation, we see that our perpendicular line has a slope of 1/3. So our slope that we use for our line needs to be the complete opposite. So what's the opposite of 1/3? Well, first things first, we know it has to be negative. So it has to be the opposite sign. Then we're going to flip it upside down. So it's going to be 3/1, or we could just write it as -3. So using that as our slope, using our x1, y1, we're going to have y minus 1 equals -3 times x minus 1. No double negatives I need to fix. So there's my final answer. Now it's your turn. Use the example we just did. I want you to write the equation of a line that's perpendicular to the given equation that you see here. So perpendicular to this equation. And it goes to the point -4, 2. So go ahead and pause the video now. And when you're finished, press play and the answer will be up on the screen. Here we go. So let's start with the slope. We need to be perpendicular to y equals 3/2 x minus 8. That means we need the opposite of 3/2, the opposite of the slope. So the opposite of positive 3/2 would be -2/3. Opposite signs, flip the fraction. So using that as our value for m, plugging into our equation, we would get y minus 2 equals -2/3 times x minus a -4. We're going to go ahead and fix that double negative to turn to x plus 4, and there you have your final answer. As always, if you have any questions or need further clarification on any part of the video, please make a note so we can take care of that in class.